Hi everyone, it's Ran here. Welcome to some place that is not my room, guys. I hope you're well today. The place is a little bit bare, but I thought I'd share a video with you. In response to an article that a dear friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, sent me recently. It's an article on the website psyche.co, and the title of it is "When the Human Tendency to Detect Patterns Goes Too Far." And it's an article about a condition called apophenia or patternicity, which is the tendency to detect patterns and to see meaning in patterns that actually don't exist. So you create meaning where it doesn't actually it's not actually there. So of course we have like mild versions of this in visual apophenia, say like when we look at the sky and we see clouds in the shape of a sheep or whatever. So all of us have that tendency in our psyche that exists, but I guess when it becomes a condition or an issue is when it kind of tends to overtake our life, or it happens all the time. So it seems to be associated with certain symptoms of psychosis. So it belongs to the same class as delusions, hallucinations, and it can go to the extreme. So seeing meaningful connections in places that don't warrant that, right? We can also create a link there with conspiracy theory. And I think that, my friend was interested in, what my friend was wondering was whether INFJs were particularly prone to that, as opposed to, as compared to other types. It's a really interesting question, because I think they are. And I think they are not only because you'll notice there's a lot of conspiracy theorists among INFJs, or rather, there's a lot of INFJs among conspiracy theories. I think they're overrepresented. So if INFJs are 2% of the overall population max, I wouldn't be surprised if they were like 5-10% of the conspiracy theorist population. So overrepresented. And I think this is a reality that we have to face and try to understand why. It's a serious thing. And I've talked about the topic of conspiracy theory before on this channel. Anyway, I'll link the article. I link, if I remember to do that, the video I made at the time on conspiracy theory and INFJs. Before I start exploring it a bit more detail, I don't have my books to do my advertising, so some of you will be pleased that you don't have to see that again. But don't forget, you can purchase my books. I have written a book on the INFJ. You see the link there, down there in the description box, The Ecstatic Soul, and my book, The Infinite Castle, which is a novel with the rumored to be INFJ protagonist. So check them out, and really supports me. What supports me just as much, if not more, is supporting my Patreon page. And from anywhere, up from, equal to or up from €3 a month, you can really help me basically finance my work to a minimal level, so that I can make it sustainable, as more and more uncertainty and moving and lots of aspects, make it hard, So thank you so much to my Patreon supporters. You help massively, and do consider joining. And there will be, there is community there, a growing community, and more. I try to make as much exclusive content as possible as well there. Although my Patreon supporters are very kind and altruistic people, and they tend to encourage me to publish that eventually on my channel anyway. But so consider supporting me on Patreon. That's the first link you'll see in the description box. Thank you so much. So yeah, apophenia. I think that if we accept that INFJs are overrepresented in conspiracy theories compared to the rest of the population, compared to how they are representing the rest of the population, it's only one step towards considering that like INFJs are a bit more likely to be apophenic, or falling prey to patternicity as compared to other people. Now, it's not necessarily always a bad thing, because seeing meaningful connection can contribute to having a highly creative mind as well. The question is, how far do you push it? Do you make it political, and so on and so forth? In terms of understanding where it comes from, I think, as a preliminary observation, I would say that combining high NI, being connected to the inner archetypes, which are timeless by definition, connecting you to a world that is stable and eternal and has lots of connections between symbols. If you combine that to the real world, which is secular time, we've talked about this before, that doesn't correspond to a lot of what INFJs idealize and value, and is accessed through an inferior function, the gathering process of extroverted perception, SE in the case of the INFJ. So you've got a combination devaluing of objective reality and high valuing, I'm not going to say overvaluing, but high valuing of the subjective reality of the inner contents of eternal archetypes, right? Now, essentially, there is meaningful connection between the eternal archetypes. I think that there's a combination between the fact that the INFJ wants to value this and doesn't like, fundamentally, the absence of meaningful connections in the external objective world, which is not valued anyway because of inferior SE. If the INFJ is in the grip, it can make that even more pronounced. But I think that the INFJ is going to have a tendency to let the reality of the inner archetypes, which is the deep world as opposed to the external world, leak into the reality of the secular world as we see it. Not just because they're deluded, but sometimes it comes from a strong ethical, moral point of view, or at least the motivation to begin with, which can lead to excesses, which can lead to being wrong, essentially. But I think it comes from a place of really wanting to remain, for this deep world to remain resonant in their existence, because they find it very difficult to basically completely repress this in the name of just operating and coping in an external world that is a world of P leads and J leads, and where there's not a lot of room for them. So since it's not a world that in itself values the insight of introverted intuition, I think what happens sometimes in the case of patronicity on apophenia is that the INFJ copes with this world by allowing the NI deep world to leak into it and blend with it, so that it can remain present in the life of an INFJ, making the external objective world of secular time a bit more bearable. The problem is that if the blending is pushed too far, well, then the meaningful connections that only really exist in the deep world of the unconscious and the archetypes starts being mixed up with, concatenations of causes or events that don't actually connect in the external world. So essentially the INFJ is wanting to experience the external world like they are experiencing their deep unconscious world. And you can't really do that except in creative fantasy that you're aware of you're engaging in, whether it's in writing, dreaming, daydreaming, whatever. It can be good, even in meditation. Once the two begin to blend too closely, I think then you do end up seeing, meaningful connection where that doesn't exist. And I think it comes from a real source of being lonely in a world where the idea doesn't belong. So it comes from a place of wanting to cope, but it can lead to, I think it probably can lead to certain forms of like advanced neurosis or psychosis, which probably have other causes, by the way, but that can be one of the causes, or at least one of the triggers. So this idea of the NI deep world, again, unconscious archetypes, eternal, highly meaningful, hence, the principle of Jungian synchronicity, the acausal connection, and so on. As long as that's understood in terms of the world of the archetypes, that's fine. But if it starts leaking into the objective external world, which is a world that's best described essentially by, physics, sociology, and so on and so forth, you can have, and history as well, of course, you can have some funny events happening. And it can be actually, in fact, in the end, detrimental to the INFJ's health. So it's something to keep in mind. But these are my initial observations on that front. I will stop here for now because I'm curious to hear what you think, and maybe I can explore that in a bit more detail at the weekend or next week or soonish. But that's for my first observation. So I linked the article again. I suggest, if you have the time, to have a look at it and see if you relate. See if you have met other INFJs that seem to exemplify that, leading you to similar observations as me in terms of like a slight overrepresentation. And notice that if what I'm saying is true, then this has to apply to INTJs as well. But it would be interesting to see if with INTJs things happen differently due to being FIT rather than FETI. Maybe that has an impact as well. Okay, in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week, guys. I will see you at the weekend. Don't forget my Patreon. I wish everybody a lovely end of the day. Bye-bye.